What happens when a beloved television actor walks onto a morning talk show expecting a friendly chat, only to be blindsided by a host with an agenda? In just 46 seconds, one inappropriate comment would ignite a firestorm that turned a cozy morning interview into the most explosive television moment of the year. This is the story of how Neil Dudgeon, the gracious star everyone adores, stood his ground against a host who crossed every line imaginable. The morning started like any other on the show. Lorraine Kelly sat behind her desk, camera ready, notes prepared, her panel of regulars flanking her on either side. To her left sat Marcus, the entertainment correspondent with his signature bright tie and notebook full of gossip. To her right was Sophie, the lifestyle guru who usually kept things light with recipes and home decorating tips. The energy in the studio buzzed with the typical morning show enthusiasm as the crew prepared for their next guest. Neil Dudgeon arrived right on schedule, dressed smartly in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt. He smiled warmly at the crew, shaking hands with the producers, thanking the makeup artist, being every bit the professional everyone knew him to be. The man had been acting for decades, charming audiences in Midsummer Murders and countless other productions. He was known in the industry not just for his talent, but for his kindness, his patience with fans, his genuine warmth. People loved working with him. The interview began pleasantly enough. Lorraine greeted him with her signature smile, the kind that had made her a morning television staple for years. But there was something different in her eyes today, something calculating that Neil couldn't quite place. "Neil, welcome to the show," Lorraine said, her voice syrupy sweet. "It is always such a pleasure to have you here." "Thank you for having me, Lorraine," Neil replied, settling into the chair across from her. "It is lovely to be here." Marcus leaned forward from his spot on the panel, jumping in with enthusiasm. "Neil, we have to talk about the new season. The fans are absolutely buzzing about it. What can you tell us?" Neil's face lit up. He loved talking about his work, loved sharing the behind-the-scenes stories that fans enjoyed. "Well, I can tell you that this season has some of our most intricate mysteries yet. The writers have really outdone themselves. We filmed in some absolutely stunning locations, and the guest cast is phenomenal." Sophie chimed in, her voice bright and friendly. "The show has been running for so long now. You must have some wonderful memories from all these years." "Oh, absolutely," Neil said, warming to the conversation. "Every season brings something new. The cast and crew are like family at this point. We have such a wonderful time together, even when we are solving the most gruesome murders on screen." The conversation flowed naturally for a few more minutes. Neil discussed his character's development, shared a funny anecdote about a scene that went hilariously wrong during filming, and talked about his appreciation for the dedicated fan base. Everything seemed perfectly normal, perfectly cordial. But Lorraine was waiting, biding her time. Then, without warning, her tone shifted. "Neil," Lorraine said, her smile taking on a sharper edge, "I do have to ask about something that has been circulating. There have been some comments made about your age and whether you can really continue carrying a show like this much longer." The atmosphere in the studio changed instantly. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sophie's smile froze on her face. The crew exchanged glances. Neil, to his credit, maintained his composure, though a flicker of surprise crossed his features. "I'm sorry, Lorraine. I'm not sure what you mean," Neil said carefully, his voice still polite, but noticeably cooler. "I feel I'm performing the role as well as I ever have. The producers certainly haven't expressed any concerns." Lorraine pressed on, undeterred. "Well, you know how television can be. Fresh faces, younger energy. Some people have been saying that perhaps it is time for the show to bring in someone new. Someone more, shall we say, contemporary." Marcus tried to intervene, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. "Lorraine, I think what really matters is the quality of the performance, and Neil has been absolutely brilliant, consistent year after year." But Lorraine waved him off dismissively, her focus entirely on Neil. Marcus, darling, let's not be naive about how this industry works. We all know there comes a time when someone has simply had their run. Perhaps Neil's time has come and gone. Neil sat straighter in his chair, his professional demeanor still intact, but his voice gaining an edge of steel. With all due respect, Lorraine, I believe the millions of viewers who tune in every week would disagree with that assessment. The ratings have been strong, the reviews have been positive, and I take great pride in the work we do. Sophie attempted to lighten the mood, speaking quickly. And those viewers are so loyal. The fan community is incredible. They love what you bring to the role, Neil. Lorraine's smile had become almost predatory now. She leaned forward across her desk, her eyes fixed on Neil with an intensity that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. But Neil, surely even you must see that you are not exactly bringing in the younger demographic anymore. The show's audience is aging along with you. Do you not think it is a bit selfish to hold on to the role when someone younger could revitalize the entire series? The word selfish hung in the air like a grenade. Marcus's eyes went wide. Sophie actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The camera operators looked at each other in disbelief. This had gone from an awkward line of questioning to a direct attack. Neil took a slow breath, his jaw tightening. When he spoke, his voice was measured but firm. Selfish? Lorraine, I am not quite sure where this hostility is coming from, but I find that characterization not only inaccurate, but frankly insulting. I have dedicated years to this role. I work incredibly hard. I am professional on set, and I have nothing but respect for everyone I work with. To suggest that I am somehow being selfish by doing my job well is absurd. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, a smug expression settling on her face. Well, I am simply saying what a lot of people in the industry have been thinking. Sometimes the truth hurts, Neil. Perhaps you are just too sensitive to hear it. Marcus jumped in again, his voice urgent. Lorraine, this really is not fair. Neil came here today to talk about the new season, to share his work with our viewers. This line of questioning is inappropriate. Lorraine turned on Marcus with a sharp look. Marcus, I am conducting this interview. If you cannot handle a bit of honest journalism, perhaps you should step out. Sophie spoke up, her voice trembling slightly but determined. This is not honest journalism, Lorraine. This is just being needlessly cruel. Now, Lorraine's mask of professionalism was slipping entirely. Her voice rose, taking on a sharp, cutting quality. Oh, so now I am the villain for asking the difficult questions, for saying what everyone else is too polite to say? Neil is past his prime. The show is stagnating. These are facts. Neil had heard enough. He stood up slowly, methodically removing the microphone clipped to his lapel. His movements were calm, controlled, dignified. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that silenced the entire studio. Lorraine, I came here today in good faith to discuss my work and connect with viewers who enjoy the show. What I did not come here for was to be insulted, belittled, and subjected to what I can only describe as a bizarre personal attack. You have made it abundantly clear that you have some sort of agenda, and I refuse to sit here and be your target any longer. Lorraine's eyes flashed with anger. She stood as well, her voice rising to match her indignation. You cannot just walk out of an interview, Neil. That is incredibly unprofessional. Neil placed the microphone carefully on the chair, his expression remaining calm and composed. Actually, Lorraine, I can walk out. And I am. What is unprofessional is inviting a guest onto your show and then using your platform to launch personal attacks. You have shown a staggering lack of respect, not just for me, but for your own panelists who tried to steer this back to something reasonable. Marcus stood up from his spot on the panel, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Lorraine, he is right. This has been completely out of line from the start. You ambushed him. Sophie remained seated, but nodded emphatically. I have never been so uncomfortable on this set. Neil has been nothing but gracious. And this was just cruel. Lorraine looked between her panelists and her departing guest, her face reddening with a mixture of anger and something that might have been embarrassment, though she would never admit it. Her voice took on a defensive, almost shrill quality. I was asking legitimate questions that viewers want answers to. If Neil cannot handle a bit of tough questioning, then perhaps he really is too fragile for this industry. Neil paused at the edge of the set, turning back to face her one last time. His voice was steady, but there was steel in every word. There is a difference between tough questioning and cruelty, Lorraine. What you displayed here today was not journalism. It was not even entertainment. It was simply mean-spirited and petty. You asked me if I thought I was being selfish by continuing to do my job well. I would ask you the same question. Are you being selfish by using your position to tear down someone who came here in good faith? The silence that followed was deafening. Crew members stood frozen, cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of the unraveling. Lorraine opened her mouth, then closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words for perhaps the first time in her career. Marcus took a step toward Neil, his expression apologetic. Neil, I am so sorry. This should never have happened. Sophie spoke up as well, her voice thick with emotion. You deserve so much better than this. You have always been wonderful to all of us. Neil nodded to both of them, his expression softening slightly. Thank you both. I appreciate you trying to bring some sanity to this situation. Sut, you are good people working on a show that clearly does not deserve you. Lorraine found her voice again, and it came out sharp and defensive. How dare you insult my show? I have been doing this for decades. I know how to conduct an interview. Neil looked at her with something close to pity. If this is how you conduct interviews, Lorraine, then I would suggest you have lost sight of what good journalism, or even basic human decency, looks like. You came into this with an agenda to tear me down for reasons I cannot even begin to fathom. Perhaps you are threatened by people who have managed to maintain both longevity and respect in this industry. Perhaps you are simply having a bad day. I do not know, and frankly, I do not care. What I do know is that I will not stand here and be your punching bag. The production assistant standing near the exit looked panicked, whispering urgently into her headset. The director in the control room was surely scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage what had become an absolute disaster. But Neil was not interested in their problems. He had made his decision. You know what the saddest part of all this is? Neil continued, his voice calm but filled with disappointment. I have watched your show for years. I have respected your work. I thought you were someone who championed people in the industry, who celebrated their achievements. Instead, I find you are someone who is willing to tear others down for the sake of, what? Creating a dramatic moment? Making yourself look tough? It is beneath you. Or at least, it should be. Lorraine's face had gone from red to almost purple. Her hands gripped the edge of her desk so tightly, her knuckles were white. Get out then. If you cannot handle an honest conversation, then leave. But do not expect to come back. Neil actually smiled at that, though there was no warmth in it. Oh, Lorraine, I can assure you, coming back to this show is the absolute last thing on my mind. I wish I could say it has been a pleasure, but we both know that would be a lie. Marcus, Sophie, it truly has been lovely seeing you both. I hope you find yourselves working in a better environment soon. With that, Neil turned and walked off the set with his head held high, his posture straight, every inch the professional that Lorraine had tried so hard to diminish. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the stunned silence of the studio. Marcus looked at Lorraine with barely concealed disgust. I cannot believe you just did that. That man is a legend in this industry, and you treated him like garbage. Sophie's voice was quiet, but firm. This was wrong, Lorraine. Completely wrong. Lorraine whirled on them both, her composure completely shattered now. You two need to remember who signs your paychecks. I was doing my job, asking the hard questions that needed to be asked. If neither of you can support that, then perhaps you should follow Neil out that door. Marcus stood up fully, grabbing his notes from the panel desk. You know what, Lorraine? Maybe I will, because what happened here today was not journalism. It was bullying, plain and simple, and I want no part of it. Sophie remained in her seat, but her expression was one of deep disapproval. We are supposed to be celebrating people's work here, Lorraine, not tearing them apart for sport. The director's voice crackled over the studio speakers, sounding stressed and urgent. We need to go to commercial. Now. Lorraine stood at her desk, breathing heavily. Her perfect morning show facade completely destroyed. Around her, the studio buzzed with whispered conversations, crew members shaking their heads, the atmosphere thick with shock and disapproval. As the commercial break began, one of the producers rushed onto the set, her face pale with panic. Lorraine, what on earth was that? We've already gotten 3 calls from upstairs. This is going to be everywhere. Lorraine waved her off dismissively, though her hand was shaking. It will blow over. People love drama. This will boost our ratings. Marcus, still standing at the edge of the set with his notes in hand, shook his head in disbelief. You really do not get it, do you? This is not going to blow over. You attacked a beloved actor on live television for no reason. You made yourself look petty and cruel, and you have lost any credibility you might have had as an interviewer who respects her guests. The producer nodded frantically. Marcus is right. The phones are ringing off the hook. Social media is exploding. And none of it is good, Lorraine. People are furious. Sophie finally stood up from the panel, removing her own microphone. Her voice was sad, but resolute. I have been on this show for 5 years. I have never seen anything like what just happened. Neil Dudgeon is one of the kindest, most professional people in this business. He came here to share his work, and you ambushed him with personal attacks disguised as questions. That was not journalism, Lorraine. That was just mean. Lorraine's eyes flashed dangerously. So, you are turning on me, too? After everything I have done for your career? Sophie met her gaze steadily. You did not do anything for my career that I did not earn myself. And right now, I am deeply ashamed to be associated with what happened here today. You owe Neil an apology. You owe all of us an apology. But somehow, I do not think you are capable of that kind of self-reflection. The commercial break was nearly over. The director's voice came through again, more urgent this time. We are back in 30 seconds. Lorraine, you need to address this somehow. We cannot just pretend it did not happen. Lorraine straightened her jacket, trying to compose herself. But the damage was done. Her hair was slightly disheveled from her earlier agitation. Her makeup could not hide the flush that still colored her cheeks, and her eyes held a wildness that betrayed her lack of control over the situation. Marcus placed his notes back on the panel desk, but his body language made it clear he did not want to be there. If you try to spin this as Neil being unprofessional, I will contradict you on air. What happened was crystal clear to everyone watching. The countdown began. 10 seconds. 9, 8. Sophie retook her seat reluctantly, her expression making it abundantly clear that she was only staying out of professional obligation, not loyalty to the host. 7, 6, 5. Lorraine sat back down at her desk, trying to school her features into something resembling calm professionalism. But her hands were still trembling slightly as she shuffled her papers. 4, 3, 2. The red light on the camera blinked on. They were live again. Lorraine looked directly into the camera, her smile forced and brittle. Welcome back. As you just witnessed, our interview with Neil Dudgeon took an unexpected turn. Neil chose to leave the interview, and that is his right. However, I stand by my questions. Sometimes we have to ask the difficult things that others are afraid to address. Marcus could not stay silent. His voice cut through her justification like a knife. Lorraine, with all due respect, those were not difficult questions. They were personal attacks. There is a significant difference between challenging journalism and what happened here today. Lorraine's smile froze. On live television, with cameras rolling and viewers watching, her panelist had just openly contradicted her. Her voice took on a strained quality as she tried to maintain control. Marcus, I think we can agree to disagree on interview techniques. No, actually we cannot, Marcus replied firmly. Neil Dudgeon is a respected professional who has been nothing but gracious throughout his entire career. He came here expecting a normal interview about his work, and instead, he was subjected to what can only be described as a personal attack. The viewers deserve to know that what they witnessed was not standard practice for this show, or at least, it should not be. Sophie nodded, finding her voice as well. I have to agree with Marcus. I have been deeply uncomfortable throughout that entire segment. Neil handled himself with remarkable grace under circumstances that were frankly hostile. He had every right to leave, and honestly, I do not blame him one bit. The viewers at home were watching Lorraine's carefully constructed authority crumble in real time. Her face had gone from flushed to pale, her eyes darting between her rebellious panelists and the unblinking camera lens. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out forced and hollow. Well, it seems my panel has very strong feelings about this. I suppose that is what makes for interesting television. Marcus shook his head. This is not about interesting television, Lorraine. This is about basic respect and human decency. Those are not negotiable, no matter what the format. The producer in the control room was frantically signaling to go to another segment, to cut away from the disaster unfolding on screen. The director's voice came through Lorraine's earpiece, but she seemed paralyzed, unable to transition smoothly out of the chaos she had created. Sophie continued, her voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of what was happening. For anyone watching at home who might be concerned, I want to assure you that Neil Dudgeon is an absolute professional. He has brought joy to millions of viewers for years. What happened today does not reflect on him in any way. If anything, his decision to stand up for himself and walk away with dignity shows exactly the kind of person he is. Someone with principles who will not tolerate being disrespected, regardless of the platform. Lorraine finally found her voice again, though it was tight with barely controlled anger. I think we have spent quite enough time on this. Let us move on to our next segment. But the damage was irreversible. Marcus and Sophie had made their positions crystal clear. The crew had witnessed everything. The viewers had seen the whole ugly incident unfold from start to finish. And Neil Dudgeon had walked away with his dignity intact, leaving Lorraine to face the wreckage of her own making. Behind the scenes, in the green room where guests waited before their appearances, staff members were already talking in hushed, shocked tones. One of the assistants who had greeted Neil earlier that morning stood with tears in her eyes. He was so nice when he arrived, she said to her colleague. He thanked everyone, asked about our days, was just genuinely kind. And then, to watch him be treated like that on air, it was horrible. Her colleague nodded grimly. I have worked on this show for 3 years. I have never seen anything like that. Lorraine has always been tough in interviews, but this was something else entirely. This was personal, and completely uncalled for. In the control room, the director was on the phone with network executives, his voice stressed and apologetic. The show's social media manager sat at her computer, staring in horror at the flood of comments pouring in. Every single one was condemning Lorraine's behavior and expressing support for Neil. Back on set, as the show limped through its remaining segments, the atmosphere remained strained and uncomfortable. Marcus and Sophie fulfilled their professional obligations, but their interactions with Lorraine were cold and minimal. The easy banter that usually characterized the show was completely absent, replaced by an awkward formality that made every minute feel like an hour. When the show finally ended, Lorraine stood up from her desk without a word to her panelists and walked off the set. Marcus and Sophie exchanged glances, then followed at a distance. The crew began breaking down equipment in silence, the usual cheerful chatter replaced by subdued murmurs. Meanwhile, Neil Dudgeon had already left the building. He walked out into the morning sunshine, took a deep breath, and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Yes, the interview had been a disaster. Yes, Lorraine Kelly had shown herself to be someone completely different from the persona she presented on television. But Neil had stood his ground. He had refused to be diminished. She refused to accept treatment that was fundamentally disrespectful. He thought about calling his agent, letting them know what had happened. But he decided it could wait. Right now, he just wanted to get home, perhaps call his family, and remind himself that his worth was not determined by how one bitter television host chose to treat him. What Neil could not see, but what was already beginning to happen all across the country and beyond, was a groundswell of support. Viewers who had watched the interview were taking to social media in droves, expressing their outrage at Lorraine's behavior and their admiration for Neil's dignified exit. Fellow actors and industry professionals were speaking out, sharing their own positive experiences, working with Neil, and condemning the ambush-style interview. The story of what happened on Lorraine Kelly's show that morning would become legendary in television circles. Not because of the host's behavior, which would be universally condemned, but because of how Neil Dudgeon handled it. With grace, with dignity, with a clear sense of his own worth that no amount of hostility could shake. He had come to the show as a guest. He had left as a hero. And Lorraine Kelly, in her attempt to create a dramatic moment, had succeeded only in revealing her own shortcomings while highlighting everything that made Neil Dudgeon beloved by fans and respected by colleagues. In 46 seconds, one inappropriate comment had set off a chain reaction. But it was not Neil who had fallen. It was the host who had so confidently tried to tear him down, only to find that sometimes, when you attack someone with nothing but grace and dignity as their weapons, you end up being the one who loses everything.